to order. Welcome to meeting number 27 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So that you are aware, the webcast will only show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline the regular rules. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English or French. Please select the language of your choice. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name, and that when you are not speaking, please make sure that your microphone is on mute. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. As is my normal practice, I will hold up a yellow card for when you have 30 seconds remaining in your intervention, and I will hold up the red card for when your time for questions has expired. As we have a tight schedule today, I ask that you please respect the time limit so that everyone can have a chance to have their questions heard. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, March 19th, 2021, the committee is meeting today to continue its study on the proposed acquisition of Shaw by Rogers. I'd like to now welcome our witnesses. De Québécois,
From Québécois Media, Mr. Pierre Carpellado, President and Chief Executive Officer. From Videotron, Mr. Jean-François Pruneau, President and Chief Executive Officer.
Communication Systems Alliance, Mr. Jay Thompson, Chief Executive Officer. And for our second panel, I will introduce them when they join at 3:30. Each witness will present for up to 3 minutes, followed by a round of questions. I understand that Mr. Pelledo will be taking the slot for Québécois and Videotron, and they may share that time. So with that, I will turn the floor to Mr. Pelledo. Mr. Pelledo.
Mr. Pelledo, you have 6 minutes total. Thank you very much. You are on mute, Mr. Pelledo. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, my name is Pierre Carpellado. I'm President and CEO of Québécois. Today I'm accompanied by Jean-François Pruneau, President and Chief Executive Officer of Videotron. So noting the lack of real competition in the wireless sector, which has resulted in prices that are among the highest in the industrialized world, the federal government, with diligence and discipline, has since 2007 pursued a policy aimed at enabling the emergence and sustainability of a strong fourth wireless player with its own facilities in all regions of the country. The conditions put in place during the 2008 AWS auction have made it possible to achieve these objectives. Videotron in Quebec and Eastlink in the Maritime provinces have been linchpins of this successful policy. In addition, since 2008, we have invested more than $2 billion to provide the best networks and most innovative services in Quebec. As a result, Quebecers now pay the lowest wireless rates in Canada, up to 35 to 40% less than elsewhere in the country. Don't take my word for it. The CRTC and the Competition Bureau say so. That is true for rates, but it is also true for customer service, which everyone knows the big three don't take very seriously. All of this was made possible because the federal government understood nearly 15 years ago that vigorous competition would not emerge on its own, and that concrete measures had to be put in place to break the big three oligopoly. I'm referring specifically to 3 measures. 1, set aside spectrum. 2, mandatory sharing of towers to avoid their proliferation and visual pollution, and to accelerate wireless rollout. And 3, mandatory roaming. However, those measures were not so successful everywhere, and Canada had to go through the Wind Mobile fiasco. whose funding by foreigners was not intended to build a network, but rather to speculate. Meanwhile, two other new arrivals, Public Mobile and Mobilicity, were swallowed up. Wind finally found strong support in Shaw, which has proven perfectly capable of taking on the big three in Ontario and the West. Rogers' proposed deal to acquire Shaw will result in a return to square one and the elimination of the fourth player, essential to maintaining real competition. The various regulatory authorities, as well as you, members of Parliament, have to ask yourselves the following question. Do consumers in other provinces deserve to have the same experience as those in Quebec and the Maritime provinces? That is, to be able to buy their services from a trusted and innovative provider like Videotron, which is not a member of the Big Three oligopoly. One thing is certain. The dramatic consequences of abandoning this policy of fostering real competition will not be solved by mobile virtual network operators, MVNOs, as we say in our jargon, which are entities that exist only through their access to others' networks. Since they are essentially resellers of capacity, they will never have the same impact on the market as providers with their own facilities, since they do not have the real means to innovate. This is based on our experience, because Videotron itself was an MVNO before 2010. Clearly, this model does not allow for the attributes and flexibility necessary to compete with the Big Three oligopoly, which controls over 90% of Canadian wireless market. If we want sustainable competition that will benefit consumers in the long term, then it is necessary not only to maintain and strengthen the facilities-based competition model, but also stay the course with the fourth wireless player policy. Rogers and Shaw have argued before you that investments in 5G justify market concentration. But this claim is rather surprising since, as recently as December past, Shaw wrote the following to this committee. And I am referring to what they submitted on December 18th. And I quote a very brief extract. This is a clear and desperate attempt to thwart the entry and expansion of regional competitors like Shaw in order to maintain and consolidate their dominant position in the 5G market. So in conclusion, we urge you to have the courage to subject the main transaction of combining the wireline networks to the transfer of Freedom Mobile's assets by including the necessary conditions for the effective operation of a wireless network, including spectrum ownership, roaming agreements, tower sharing, and a fair deal for the use of the wireline backhaul network. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Pilado.
To Mr. Thompson, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Jay Thompson, CEO of the Canadian Communication Systems Alliance, or CCSA. CCSA represents independent communication companies which provide bundled TV, internet, and telephone services to Canadians mostly living in smaller communities and rural areas. The Rogers and Shaw families are long-standing industry colleagues, and we regard the companies they have built with the greatest respect. Nevertheless, we fear that the Rogers-Shaw deal has the real potential to make some already bad things worse, both in broadcasting and in telecom. Last week, we appeared before the Heritage Committee for its study of Bill C-10, which would amend the Broadcasting Act. We highlighted that Rogers, as well as Bell and Quebecor, have already become so big and powerful that the CRTC has had to implement regulatory safeguards to preclude them from using their size to increase consumer costs and reduce choice. We advised that committee that those domestic communications giants have been using their size and influence to undermine the CRTC's consumer safeguards, and we warn that they will only increase those efforts if left unchecked. Regardless of this Rogers-Shaw deal, the CRTC's authority to establish and enforce its consumer safeguards must be confirmed and strengthened. With this deal, a giant will get bigger. Rogers cable and internet subscribers will roughly double in size. That will double the guaranteed cable subscribers to Rogers TV services like Sportsnet at its own preferred rates. Absent the CRTC's safeguards, Rogers could then use its expanded cable size to squeeze smaller cable companies for higher carriage rates for its services, as well as for other concessions, resulting in higher prices and less choice for rural Canadians. Further, absent the CRTC's safeguards, Rogers could use its expanded internet size to favor itself with exclusive access arrangements for its online sports service, Sportsnet Now. And what will ultimately happen with the numerous Chorus TV services now owned by the Shaw family? No one knows. Should the big get bigger, that will only increase the need to ensure that the CRTC has the authority to implement regulatory safeguards to protect consumers against the domestic giants. Safeguarding consumers where an industry is dominated by a few large players also comes through regulatory decisions that promote competition from other players. The most important of such decisions in these circumstances now becomes the CRTC's pending ruling on providing mobile competition to all the dominant wireless providers through mobile virtual network operators, or MVNOs. As with the other consumer safeguards, MVNO competition is needed regardless of this Rogers-Shaw deal, but even more so if the deal goes through. But to end on a positive note, as an industry committed to extending broadband to all Canadians wherever they live, we appreciate Rogers' commitment to a $1 billion broadband fund. But the devil will be in the details as to whether it will actually accomplish its welcome goals. And so more scrutiny is warranted. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. We'll now start our round of questions. Our first 6-minute round, we will start with Député Généreux. Vous avez 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Pelado. Mr. Pelado, you just candidly used the expression parasite when you said that when you started in the sector, you were one of the ones who used others in facilities. You have become a major player in Quebec, but also in Canada, I think. At the end of your presentation, you said that in this transaction, at the very least, there should be rules regarding the spectrum. Can you talk to us more about that? Because the people from Shaw and Rogers didn't want to extrapolate too much on spectrum restrictions, because by June, the spectrum should already be sold or attributed. Can you comment on that further, please? You are on mute. Thank you. Thank you to the member. Well, I think there's an important nuance. When we use the word parasite, we're also talking about rates that are regulated. At the time when we were thinking that Videotron was ready to jump into wireless telephone, we came up with an agreement. It was negotiated with Rogers at that time. And what that did, or rather, that is relevant because for the 2008 auction, there were certain conditions. And I think we were able to convince the late Jim Prentice that to gain competition, we needed that agreement. So there were 3 major agreements, one regarding spectrum, which you referred to. The first was regarding roaming. Why? Because a network isn't built overnight, it is built year after year. So in order to count on your network, you have to first count on and use others' networks. So when you have your phone, when you're a subscriber, when you're in a different country, when you're in France or the United States, you are on another provider's network and you have a roaming agreement, which is desired and is necessary in Canada for new arrivals. Also, there was tower sharing to cut down on visual pollution so that operators could agree and have just the one tower where all antenna for all operators were located. Mr. Pelado, just one moment. I might be mistaken, but right now, doesn't Quebecor not share its towers with all other industry players? We have towers, and we share them with other operators, in particular Rogers, because we have an agreement, and we still have an agreement. DeepNet, just like Bell has its own agreement. So it's TeamNet rather. And we hope that this will also be another new condition as it exists today for Shaw, because I presume that the roaming agreement exists. And the third aspect was regarding spectrum. You were right. And all I can do is repeat what my colleagues from the industry mentioned, including Mr. Natel and Bradshaw, regarding auctions that are upcoming in the next few weeks. However, there are auctions that took place in the past, and if we want competition, a strong fourth player, we need to look at transferring agreements. We need to look at transferring spectrum so that clients can have high-quality service with extremely competitive rates. Mr. Pelado, we know that you are very prominent in Quebec. Have you ever been targeted regarding your development? Let's take Videotron or Quebecor. If one wanted to move to the west of Canada and be competitive with Shaw, would that be good for you but not good for them, or vice versa? Well, here we're talking about the Shaw-Rogers transaction. Rogers, as you probably know, is already an operator that's one of the big three, part of the oligopoly. But that's not the case for us. I think that's quite clear. Okay, Madam Chair, do I have time left? You're on mute now. 15 seconds. Okay, I'll hand it over to my colleague. Thank you, Mr. Pelado. You're welcome.
Go to MP Labropoulos. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you to both of our witnesses for being here with us today. And my first question will go to Mr. Thompson. You spoke about the importance of rural broadband and how you were glad to see that, as much as the deal may not be ideal, you're glad to see that there are investments that they're committing to in rural broadband, and you said that the devil is in the details. I was hoping you could maybe give us a bit more about what you would think would be an acceptable deal. And obviously, you know that one of our government's priorities is connecting as many Canadians in rural and Indigenous communities as possible. For years, I believe the government's been trying to incentivize big companies to go there on their own and to try to get them to create the infrastructure needed. Obviously, this is seen as a positive side to the deal. Can you comment on that and give us some insight as to what you think?
Yes, thank you for the question. And we echo the importance of rolling out broadband in rural communities, and our members are doing just that, often with the help of the government programs that are in place and are much needed. and so we do welcome investment from anyone in rural broadband. It's just that the starting point is, for example, that Rogers calls this a broadband fund. It's not a fund like the Universal Broadband Fund or the Connecting Canadians or the Connecting to Innovate funds, which are open to any provider who is eligible to apply, has very clear rules as to eligibility and goals associated with it, transparency in the process, and auditing the results at the end to make sure that it actually accomplishes what the money was intended to do. As far as we know, we haven't heard any details, in fact, about the Rogers Fund, as it's called, in that respect. So it's money that Rogers has put forward as a commitment to sweeten the pot for this deal. But beyond that, they'll be in control of the money, and we don't know necessarily where it will go and how success will be measured. One of the concerns we do have is that while they suggested at the outset that the money would be going to 600,000 customers in Western Canada that are unserved or underserved, on Monday when they appeared before you, they added the goal of serving communities that already have a provider. Well, in unserved communities or underserved communities or smaller rural communities that already have a provider, it's typically because they've had access to help from the government funds. And so what Rogers is now seeming to propose is that it's going to overbuild in communities where the government has already been in to support the building of broadband. So that doesn't seem to us to be a good use of available resources and good public policy, to be overbuilding against where taxpayers have supported building already.
Thank you very much. And my next question goes to both witnesses.
So both can answer the next question. It's more, what role do you think government organizations play in this transaction? What role should the CRTC play and the Competition Bureau? How should they address the subject?
Madame la députée,
Is the question for Mr. Thompson or for both of us?
Jay, you have anything to say or on this question?
Okay, thank you. I'll just say that the CRTC has a mandate that's established in the Broadcasting Act and its own legislation, and the Competition Bureau has its own similar but separate mandate, and carry out their role as assigned to them.
I guess it's more about what you think they should be particularly focusing on before making a decision.
Well, quickly, just if it's going to be of benefit to Canadian consumers in the end.
I support and I agree with what Jay's saying. Other to say also that from the an ISED point of perspective, it would be important also to make sure that because it's a public asset, that the spectrum will be well distributed to make sure that all the operators will be in a position to provide a service of great quality and to make sure there's not going to be any lack of spectrum for the new entrants, because these are the ones that didn't have the chance to enjoy being business for the last 30 years. So they lack the same amount of spectrum that the incumbent are enjoying right now.
And Monsieur Pelado, just to be clear, you mentioned that in Quebec there are much more favorable rates for clients than in the rest of Canada, and you think that it's because competition is better in Quebec, because there are more players. Do you really think that this transaction would be negative for the rest of Canadians? And how can we
make sure that competition isn't, this transaction does not work against competition?
Ms. Chair, did I have the chance to answer for?
I'll give you a little bit of time, 15 seconds.
Okay.
Donc, 15 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
15 seconds, please.
Basically, because and it's been said before that the fourth operator, which is Freedom Mobile will disappear because the cartel or the oligopoly that Canadians used to face will be rebuilt, basically.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to Mr. Lemire. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Pelado, in your speech, you mentioned how important it is to have a fourth player in the market. Given your experience in Quebec that you spoke to us about, how did the fourth player have an impact? I tried to mention it in my speech. So, of course, the fourth player, in order to establish himself, they had to be aggressive. We participated in the first auction. It was an extremely costly auction. It cost almost $500 million in 2008. And we tried to share that amount out over the greatest number of clients possible. We wanted to build the network, and a $2 billion investment was mentioned. And so the rates were more aggressive than what they had been before. And of course, for Videotron, we paid particular attention to customer service. And God knows, increasingly, Canadians want to be able to do business with a provider that listens to their needs and picks up the phone. That's all, just picks up the phone when Canadians try to call. That's why Québecor has made efforts since we acquired Videotron in 2000. And that's one of the reasons for the 15th consecutive year, Videotron was considered being being Quebecers' favorite telecoms provider. So there are also Rogers and Telus and other internet access providers, DPIAs, as we call them. And the objective was to decrease prices. So why do you ask so much effort on the four-player competition model, and how should that model work in Canada? I don't think that we are asking the government or the state to invest in the fourth player. What we believe to be the solution is for the government to make sure that the conditions exist so that a fourth player can in turn exist, and to regularly and consistently create that competition. And that's why Minister Prentice and we pleaded our case before him, and we weren't the only ones, regarding spectrum set-asides, obligatory or mandatory roaming requirements, among others. So this would lead to networks being built and would lead to sustainability of competition. And the result is that Quebecers, when we compare them to other Canadians, enjoy the lowest wireless rates in Canada. I would like to ask you a question regarding the Rogers transaction and its relation to Freedom Mobile. Would Videotron want to acquire Freedom Mobile? Well, in 2008, we already approached certain operators to try and have a national presence. One reason was that our financial capacity at the time, and taking inflation into account regarding auction prices, and there was a group called Globalive at the time. which made the auction prices increase rapidly. And this was funded by foreigners. I called it the wind fiasco. So there was a serious player with the necessary financial power to invest in the network. So Shaw, a few years later, took back Wind Mobile. If Shaw were to acquire Freedom Mobile, of course, that fourth player would disappear. Now, to answer your question specifically, I would have to say that if we were interested in 2008, we certainly are the candidate with the expertise, the experience, and the financial means when it comes to telecommunications and marketing that we would be able to meet the necessary criteria to be successful. Now, on spectrum, do you believe that that Shaw should be taken out of the auction process or not? Well, regarding Shaw, there are rules that are very clearly defined in auctioning rules. I could refer you to Section 261 of the rules, where it is clearly indicated that unfortunately Shaw, given the circumstances, could not be preferential and could not be a candidate for the set-aside spectrum auction. Thank you very much.
Questions goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for our two witnesses for being here. I'll start with Mr. Palado, please. One of the things that we have as a challenge is the spectrum that's been set aside in the past, how it now is being, I guess, acquired, even though it was a set aside. I want to ask you about Videotron's AWS license being sold to Rogers in the past. That was a set aside as well. How much money did Rogers pay for that? And what impact did that have on competition? And why did you, I guess, agree to that?
First of all, as I mentioned to you, Mr. Massey, we were interested in 2008 to build a national network. Unfortunately, for a different reason. One of the reasons was the auction, went very, very expensive. And considering our financial capacity, we arrive at the conclusion that we will not going to be able, to build that national network. While, we were through the auction, we bid on 10 megahertz in the Toronto area. And unfortunately, at the end of the auction, let's call it that way, we were caught with it and we were then forced to pay. But at the beginning, the purpose was to build a network, and unfortunately, we were not able to do so.
Okay, and that's the reason I asked for that, for clarity, and thank you for that. One of the things I believe that we've been doing wrong in our auctions is just trying to do a money grab. About $25 billion over the last number of years since the year 2000. And what I would prefer to see is a spectrum auction with higher degrees of standards of rollouts, protection for lower prices for base services, and expectations that if you don't use it, you lose it, almost like an RFP process. So we would allow more access in for more cost-effective measures to be the incentive of the use of the spectrum versus that of the cash grab, so to speak. If that was a policy like some other nations have done, do you think that your company, as well as others that are trying to expand their markets, might do better instead of having to borrow money on the market and then serve that debt as you're expanding into the customer base you want to grow?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Obviously, we're not the I said, we're not the one that will provide, public policy. But you probably know that, at the beginning, early in the implementation of wireless services, the spectrum was given away for the first operators. Through the decades that went back and on, the government decided that that was a public asset, and then therefore we need to make sure that we will monetize as much as possible this asset, which is limited and necessary for a public service, a wireless service. Is the actual policy perfect? I would say probably no. Saying that perfection is not of this world. Is it one of the best? I think that they've been able to analyze all the auctions around the world, and they arrive at the end of the day with the different operators in Canada that these are the rules that will govern the auction. And to make sure that competition will continue to be available, because the fourth operators are far from being the size of the three largest, the oligopoly. Then therefore we need to make sure that they will be protected and giving them set aside.
I was just trying to get at maybe a different process and priority. Because right now we're at a point where we have a protected market from foreign competition, and maybe I'll move to Mr. Thompson to get him into the conversation as well too. And the use of our spectrum has also, the end result is that we have some of the highest prices. It's not a coincidence, I don't think. We've had testimony back, but really, real quickly, Mr. Thompson, it seems very suspicious, the timing of this. Rogers did go after Cogeco earlier on, and then a hostile takeover. And then all of a sudden, at the last minute, coming to this spectrum, we have this. Would you have a position whether we should delay the spectrum, or what I prefer right now is just put the brakes on this altogether and say we're not interested in it because it's going to have profound impact? Your comments, please.
Well, frankly, Mr. Vasse, the spectrum auction, while we watch it with interest, it has really very little impact on smaller communities and smaller providers. It's a big players game. It's too costly to get into for others. And whether it goes ahead or not is really going to have very little impact on competition or access to mobile services in smaller communities. It's only the MVNO process that will help that.
Okay, yeah, well, that's my old point about changing the way we do the spectrum to allow those entrants to get into the game. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Massey. We'll now start our second round of questions. Our first round of questions goes to MP Poilievre. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My questions will be for Mr. Pelado. First, thank you for your family's contributions in business, and congratulations on your success with Videotron. You mentioned that if there were a Rogers-Shaw merger, it would be absolutely necessary to protect the fourth player principle. I agree that that approach has worked and has served our consumers. If Freedom is separated from Shaw, sold off as an asset, so we're independent from the merger, do you believe that the merger could be concluded without being adverse for consumers?
Merci.
Thank you for the question. On the contrary, I think that the merger, having Freedom Mobile be part of the assets acquired by Rogers, is that the question? Did I understand properly? If Shaw sells Freedom and Freedom is no longer part of the merger, if it becomes independent, and if someone else purchases it, or if it were a completely independent company, in that case, could the merger be concluded without it being adverse for consumers? Yes, absolutely. And I would say that competition will remain. The fourth player is important, and it does take the financial capacity, of course, to acquire the assets, but also to develop the operations, build a network, participate in auctions. there are 3,500 coming up. Then there are spectrum auctions, and spectrum auctions are recurring, and to make sure that Canadians benefit from the best service. Before there was phone service just for vocal calls. And, we can't live our lives without phones. Is there a single citizen in Canada without a phone? They're a very rare commodity. To make sure that there is competition, in my opinion, a fourth player is absolutely essential. I understand. But with that condition, you believe that the merger could be acceptable for Canadians? Yes, because as it is, Rogers and Shaw are not competitors. You probably know that all cable services, whether it's Progeco, Shaw, Rogers, or any of the other ones, they have grown through acquisitions. This is a movement over the past 30 years. And in the States, you have Cox, Charter, Comcast. So consolidation has made it so that these cable distributors historically have succeeded in maintaining and increasing cable distribution services and also increasing the quality, the speed, and the rhythm of internet and wireless phone service. Thank you very much. I'll cut you off because we don't have much time. You did say that it's an oligopoly here in Canada, and I entirely agree with that characterization. Aside from preserving the fourth player, are there any other reforms you would suggest that we could pursue in order to make the market more free and stimulate competition? Well, I think that the rules that were dictated by the government, by the state in 2008, have yielded results. Competition is there in the provinces, in Quebec, and today also in BC, in Alberta, and in Ontario. So I think it's important to maintain those, but also to ensure that from now on, when there's a spectrum auction, participants are not just there to speculate, that they are committed to build for the benefit of Canadians. Yes, investments are important, but results are also important for Canadians. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Round of questions goes to MP Asasi. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and allow me to join our colleagues in thanking the two witnesses for appearing before us today. My first question would be for Mr. Peladu. As you know, back in 2017, Bell acquired MTS. I take it that you follow developments in other provinces as well. From your standpoint, what was the consequence of that acquisition?
Maybe I will ask my colleague Jean-François, because during that time I was not at a position of as the CEO. But what I will say is that with all the respect that I have for Manitoba, and in fact, we used to have few newspapers there, especially in Winnipeg. It's a smaller province, and we've been in an environment where MTS, which was a company being there for so many years with different routes than the other operators, was not probably providing a very competitive landscape, which was not the case, I would say, elsewhere. And this competition is even more higher since technology was providing Bell to be able to broadcast, and Shaw also video through satellites, and then therefore afterward with fiber. We live in a very competitive environment, and therefore we need to make sure that it will remain. And I guess that Manitoba is probably not the highest competition area we we can find here in Canada. I don't know if Jean-François have any other things to say.
Yeah, well, if I may add, one thing that is for sure, it's for ExploreNet, the result was not that great because obviously they acquired some subscribers, but as Pierre Carl was mentioning before, there are needs to have some conditions to make sure that this kind of journey becomes viable, and the things that we're talking about are transfer of spectrum, transfer of roaming agreements, or getting into a roaming agreement that is satisfying, obviously backhauling and whatnot. And for sure, it's not what ExploreNet got in the trade that they went into with BCE. So I think that even though it looked like there was some competition maintained with ExploreNet in that respect, I think that the result was clearly not satisfying for ExploreNet because they didn't get the right assets to make sure that their journey become viable.
Thank you. Now, someone to say with in the event this merger is approved, the day for regional players will be over. Mr. Pelladieu, would you be concerned about a company possibly coming in and acquiring Quebecor if that particular merger is approved?
That's a I don't know what I can have the very simple answer. Quebecor is not for sale, as probably Cogeco was not for sale too. If we were to to find out with the Louis Audet family, and certainly this is not the situation. And personally, I inherit from my father as Louis Audet did, and my goal is to make sure that that this company will continue as a family company and provide a great future for Quebecers and for Canadians. Other than we'll find out what will be the outcome of this transaction, especially on the wireless side.
We'll hold you to that, sir. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Let's assume that this merger is approved. Would that concern you that this will lead to further consolidation because other players in the field will also consolidate?
Consolidation is always happening in this industry. And so this is just another step, and we expect that it will continue in the industry. And as I said at the outset, the bigger companies get, the harder it is for smaller companies to still have a voice, and for their customers to ensure that they still have affordable rates and the same amount of choices as those that live in larger centers with larger players.
So it would be sending the wrong signal, and it would, signal that others can do likewise in the event this was approved.
Well, it all depends on the conditions that are attached to this kind of deal, which
Absolutely.
are the kind of ones I've set out.
Thank you. I'm out of time.
Thank you very much. Notre prochaine tour.
Our next turn goes to Mr. Lemire for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll continue with Mr. Pellado. Rogers says that it will continue to invest in the west of Canada in its 5G network for rural and remote communities, including Indigenous communities, and it talks about all of those benefits. I live in a remote region, and I must say 5G is not something I particularly look forward to or anticipate. It's a very sparsely populated region. I'm not sure what impact it has. Is 5G really the panacea that Rogers tried to convince us it is? Is 5G really that important for the future? Well, wireless telephone services, since it has existed, has evolved like any other technology, like any other product. Automobiles today are not what they were years ago. And it's the same thing for telephone services. We went from 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 4D SDL, then the 5G, and there will be 6 and 7G, etc., just like Microsoft softwares. Soon, there will be the Internet of Objects. So, it's just the natural evolution of technology. and this happens in all other industries as well. What's important is that this industry, the telecoms industry, is a high capitalistic intensity industry, so it requires investments. We invest between $800 and $900 million every year, even excluding spectrum auctions. So that is part of our work. Yes, we generate a lot of cash, but we invest so much of it to make sure Canadians have the best possible communications services. And during the pandemic, we observed that that it's investments that make our Canadian network so strong. You live in Abitibi, and there was no competition in Abitibi. There was only Bell. Now there is competition in your region. There's another player, and your rates have decreased. This is your proof that competition leads to lower rates. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Questions goes to MP Massé. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Mr. Thompson again, one of the concerns that have with regards to the myriad of potential solutions of how to deal with this is everybody seems to have a plan about how to do some type of surgery on the merger to spin something off or a component or have it go to a different provider and so forth. Those could all just be failed, I guess, propositions because the market will determine it later on, and then we still would be without a fourth carrier. So wouldn't it just be better to basically reject the merger and continue with the plan and maybe perhaps look at alternatives as to how we roll out the expectation for customers with regulation? I just worry that everybody's got an idea on how to cut up parts of this deal and try to stick them on to other things like a Frankenstein's monster and then pretend it's going to work properly for consumers versus that of then we'll have the fourth one disappear.
We've been trying to get competition in the wireless market in Canada for years and years and years, and the chosen approach at one point had been the fourth carrier. And notwithstanding that we have regional players like Freedom, we still had consumers and consumer groups lining up in droves before the CRTC a year ago to seek greater competition through the MVNO process. So that is ultimately the solution to competition. It's not whoever gets the bit of pieces that are going to be broken off from this deal.
Okay, so you still believe in okay. Yeah, I just think that's important though, is that we're still, when you have any one of these four diminished and reassembled, we still have less competition. So thanks, Madam Chair. That's my questions.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to Député Généreux. Vous avez 5 minutes.
You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. We had 3 witnesses. Mr. Pruneau, we can't forget that you're with us as well. So I'll ask a question to all 3 witnesses.
Mr. Bruno.
Pardonnez-moi.
My microphone was turned off. As Pierre-Carl mentioned, I think that the disappearing of the fourth player in the Alberta, Ontario, and BC markets is not desirable. So if this transaction happened, there should be firm conditions regarding what happens to the assets. And this has an impact not only on subscribers, but on everything that is needed to operate a wireless operation. So we're talking about all of Spectrum's portfolio. Sharing towers, and I think that is one of the mistakes made in the MTS Bell deal because competition was sprinkled all around, ExploreNet and certain other ones at TELUS, and those transfers made it so that, and didn't make it so that competition was viable. Mr. Thompson?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Well, do you think we should go, or do you think we should not go, and why, if so?
Well, again, it all depends on the conditions that are attached to it. If it's ultimately there are rules that will ensure that consumers are protected from this, then that and it's to the benefit of consumers, then yes, I guess you go ahead with it. But there's a lot of things that have to happen. There are a lot of rules that have to be put in place to make sure that that is indeed the case.
Mr. Pelado, same thing? Exactly. I think Jean-François summed up our position very well. Okay, I would like to finish with you, Mr. Pelado. I'll come back to this because I found it very anecdotal. Well, not anecdotal, but I found it pretty special that what we were saying about parasites. You had been one yourself in your early stages. So these resellers sell services equivalent to your own, and the CRTC gives them certain conditions. How can that be adverse for your technology development, in particular 5G? Because I understood that in the past, it wasn't necessary to have these resellers. Well, I would like to tell you that we never said that we were against resellers. On the contrary, it does stimulate competition, and we do find them favorable. Now, what are the conditions for resale? You know, there was the decision when the government wanted to have a review and asked the CRTC to review its homework, for lack of a better expression, because if things are stretched too thin, then that's not good. So they were asking if the regulations were too high, or the requirements rather were too stringent. I don't think so. And don't forget that when we were referring to the TPIE, we are not talking about wireless. Wireless is current, so we will see how that's going to happen. And for wireless, there are also assets that are different from the ones that exist in wireline, because there are elements of the spectrum that do not apply to wireline. So we didn't say that we were against TPIA. We find them favorable, but the right balance needs to be struck, because there are investments by those who built the networks, and we don't want for an ecosystem to be created where it is negative if someone wants to invest, because Canada has one of the best networks in the world. So we want for citizens and companies to be able to benefit from a network that gives them a high, very, very high productivity level. We can never forget that a telecom network is essential. Thank you very much.
And our last round of questions for this panel will go to MP Erskine Smith. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. I want to start, Mr. Palado. We had executives from Rogers and Shaw before this committee a couple of days ago, and they said that the deal would increase competition, not reduce competition, pointing to the intensity of competition. What did you make of those comments?
Well, I would say that, history shows that when you have a four operators, you'll be able to enjoy more competition, and then therefore, that will be shown in prices and different offers that are available for consumers. Otherwise, less players, less competition. And it's true in Canada, but it's true elsewhere. And there've been many debates taking place in Europe regarding, do we need 4 or 3 operators? And most of the competition bodies there was an agreement to find out, which is quite simple also, that a fourth operator will bring more competition. And this is how it works. And
And to pick up on just that, you've said in answer to my colleague MP Palev's questions that at a minimum, if this deal is approved, it's got to come with a condition that Freedom is spun off and continues to operate as a fourth competitive entity. Are there any other conditions that you think ought to be imposed if a deal were to be approved?
Well, these are my intervention is because of making sure that we will get and we will provide a competitive environment for Canadians in the wireless business. We don't compete against Shaw in the cable business or in the internet access business on the wireline telephony. I think that Shaw had been able, to provide a very good service. In all those services, they are competing against a very large company in the western side of the country, which is TELUS, who's been providing also television for many years. But this is how it works, and it's been providing and servicing adequately the market, given also that you have smaller cable companies and also TPIA that are providing a competitive landscape. It's less true on the western side of the country. You will find less TPIA available than you will find in Quebec, which is probably also another reason why on the wireline market, it's very competitive. But if you want to make sure that you'll get competition in the wireless, a fourth operator will be the best formula and the best solution.
And Mr. Thompson, going to you with the same question, when we look at conditions, it seems at a minimum, if this deal were to be approved, it can't be that Freedom would be rolled into the big three. But what other conditions, if any, would you say are absolutely necessary for a deal to be approved?
Well, our position is that 4 isn't even enough in terms of the number of competitors out there to make sure that there are cheaper rates and more choice across the country. And we forget in the focus on wireless in this arrangement is that there is an impact on the cable side of the business with the growth in size of and the internet size with the growth that will occur for Rogers when it takes over, if it takes over Shaw. And that size, as I outlined in my opening remarks, has an impact on prices for cable television services. So we need to have rules that confirm the CRTC's authority in the Broadcasting Act to protect consumers. And those same kind of rules need to apply on the internet side to protect consumers from the size of the internet operator using that size to reduce choice in access to internet services, which is a real possibility.
Do you have concerns? We have heard that there are 3 reviews set, that the ISED is reviewing this, CRTC is reviewing this, the Bureau is reviewing this. The Bureau, it seems to me, has the biggest role to play. And yet in March, they came out against the Air Canada Transat merger and the government approved it anyway. Do you have concerns that regardless of what the Bureau says, they're going to be listened to? That's to Mr. Thompson.
The Bureau has a role to play, and I can't get it in advance of how people will react to what the Bureau does. We're confident that it will meet its mandate.
And my last question, Mr. Pellado, if Freedom is spun off, are you open to foreign ownership of the fourth carrier to ensure competition?
Well, foreign carrier unfortunately prove, and we've been seeing what took place with Wind Mobile at the beginning of the auction in 2008, and this was a failure. So you need to be an operator, and you need to have a strong financial base to be able to succeed. And I guess that foreign carriers are not able to bring this at the moment.
Thank you very much. So that wraps up our first panel for today. Before we suspend to bring on the other panel, I want to thank merci beaucoup, Monsieur Pellado.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pellado and Mr. Pruneau,
Pour votre témoignage.
for your testimony today, and Mr. Thompson for being with us.
And with that, we will suspend momentarily to allow our first panel to leave and our second panel to join.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you so much to our three witnesses for being with us today. From Open Media, we have Laura Tribe, Executive Director. Pleasure to see you again. From Public Interest Advocacy Center, John Lawford, Executive Director and General Counsel. And from Tech Savvy Solutions, Andy Kaplan-Mirth, Vice President, Regulatory and Career Affairs. Each witness will present for 3 minutes, followed by rounds of questions. With that, we will start with Ms. Tribe. You have the floor for 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Laura Tribe, and I'm the Executive Director of Open Media. I'm speaking to you today from Ottawa as a guest on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Nation. Today, as we discuss the fate of Canada's communication systems, I'd ask you to remember that Indigenous peoples from all across the country are still working to access the internet on their own terms, all while continuing to be amongst the most underserved in terms of internet access, in many cases underserved by the companies we are here to discuss today. This is the third time I've spoken before this committee in the past year. At the last two appearances, we discussed the critical need for action to bring affordable connectivity to everyone in Canada, especially during the pandemic. Unfortunately, today, instead of talking about progress we've made since, we're here to talk about a dramatic step backwards in that fight. So I'll make it simple. Canadians can't afford this deal. You must oppose the sale of Shaw to Rogers. You must oppose this deal if you care about affordable internet access in Canada. You must oppose this deal if you care about bringing more choice and competition into Canada's cell phone markets, if you believe in improving customer service, if you believe in protecting jobs in Western Canada, if you believe small and local providers deserve a chance. You must oppose this deal if you believe in bringing adequate connectivity to rural, remote, and Indigenous communities across Canada. Big telecom is already too big. Canadians already have too few choices. We simply can't afford a massive step backwards. Rogers filled its press release of the deal with promises for everything Canada wants: jobs, 5G, rural, remote, and Indigenous connectivity. When Bell purchased MTS in 2016, we heard similar promises. We also saw similar results to what we'll see here. Prices went up, people were laid off, and competition went down. Promises were broken. As nice as Rogers' big promises might sound, there is absolutely no way to hold Rogers accountable. There's no guarantees of what will come if this deal is allowed to pass. Except one: Canadians will suffer. Almost 19,000 Canadians have already signed a petition opposing this deal. Stop letting big telecom hold Canadians hostage, desperate for whatever connectivity we can get. It's time to stand up to them, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tribe. We will now go to Mr. Lawford. You have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. The Public Interest Advocacy Center has advocated for consumers for over 40 years in communications law and policy. This committee cannot stop Rogers from acquiring Shaw. Mergers are controlled by the Competition Act, and the CRTC approves broadcasting distribution deals, and ISED approves wireless spectrum transfers. What this committee can do is to help stop the next deal and to help stall this one until some regulation to support new competition has a chance to take hold. If this committee is disturbed by hearings on this deal, you can recommend, and Parliament can enact, a key change to help stop the next merger. Repeal Section 96 of the Competition Act, the so-called efficiencies defense. The efficiencies defense is an embarrassment to Canada. No other economic peer country has this defense for corporations, effectively allowing them to merge even when competition is reduced. The efficiencies defense is a standalone provision. It can be excised from the Competition Act with no other effects than simply requiring merging companies to show that their merger will not prevent or lessen competition. Repeal Section 96. As for this deal, this committee can recommend that the Minister of ISED and the Competition Commissioner hold up reviews and approvals until two key regulatory decisions are made by the CRTC that will set the table for new competitors that may help minimize the anti-competitive effects of this deal. The first decision is the Mobile Virtual Network Operators, or MVNOs. If the CRTC allows such MVNO competitors, there will be some ability for customers to switch providers to competitors other than the big three. However, if that decision puts restrictions on MVNOs that frustrate them, then there will be no wireless competitors to replace Shaw and Freedom in much of Canada. The second decision is on wholesale wireline internet delivered over fiber. The CRTC has set a rate for this new delivery method that permits wireline competitors to take on dominant internet companies like Rogers. Without it, competition to Rogers will falter, especially out west. Thank you very much, and I also welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Mr. Kaplan-Mirth. You have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. My name is Andy Kaplan-Mirth, and I'm VP Regulatory and Carrier Affairs at TechSavvy, an independent Canadian internet, phone, and TV service provider with teams now working from their homes in southwestern Ontario and Gatineau, Quebec. TechSavvy has been serving customers for over 20 years. Today, we have over 300,000 customers in every province, and we're proud to provide excellent, affordable, client-focused service. I'm happy to return to the committee today to offer TechSavvy's views on the effects and the consequences of the Rogers-Shaw merger. Without strong regulatory oversight and enforcement, it's clear that fewer competitors and further consolidation of market power will result in even worse outcomes for internet and mobile users in Canada. Ultimately, this proposed merger underscores the importance of regulation and oversight of the Canadian telecom landscape to protect and promote competition. With that said, this titanic shift in the Canadian telecom industry does come with opportunities to do better. At a high level, the concerns around this merger relate to the apparent tension between investment and competition, but that is a false dichotomy. We're really talking about two different businesses, building networks and providing services. The same companies often do both, but they are distinct lines of business with different considerations for investment and competition. And many of these issues become more clear when you think about whether they relate to building networks or to delivering services. The competition concerns with this merger are primarily about ensuring the availability of competitive services to consumers. As such, the merger of these two massive vertically integrated companies needs to be made contingent on effective and efficient regulatory measures that promote competition for services and that protect consumers' interests in the Canadian telecom sector. In particular, the CRTC needs to finalize, enforce, and commit to service-based competition by implementing the 2019 wholesale rates, ensuring access to fiber, and mandating wholesale on mobile. Finally, the Competition Bureau must be vigilant in protecting consumers and competition from abuses of market power. In particular, the efficiencies defense only works if the Bureau ensures that parties with market power don't abuse their dominance and use these efficiencies to squeeze out competitors. In closing, to accelerate the building of networks to people in underserved areas, Canada's broadband plan must include competition by design, and it must reject the false dichotomy between investment and competition. As TechSavvy continues to demonstrate, we can have both. Thank you again, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now start our round of questions. Our first 6-minute round goes to MP Dreeshen. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much to our witnesses. It's been a very interesting afternoon. I think, we look at this largest merger agreement in Canadian history. It's going to have profound implications for everyone. I'd like to start my questioning with open media. In 2018, the Vice Chairman of Rogers Communication, Phil Lind, told the news media that Canada's telecommunications sector is, and he quote, ripe for consolidation, and $1 billion deals seen by its industry peers south of the border was what he was kind of looking at and alluding to. He went on to add that the Canadian government has kept too many players in the industry by offering incentives such as cheap wireless spectrum. And he also said, because of our population, we weren't large enough to warrant all of these telecommunication carriers. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on those comments, and perhaps you could share with the committee your perspective of the consolidation trend and what Mr. Lind says about too many players in the industry for such a small population, since our witnesses on Monday hinted at the same idea.
Thank you. I would respectfully disagree. I think when we look at Canada's wireless market in particular, There was a report released just this week, again, that shows that we pay the highest prices in the world, and the direct correlation is the number of providers that we have, implying that having 3 national providers and the 4th carrier struggling to keep up is too many players is implying that they're comfortable with monopoly. And I don't think that's the world that we're trying to build. I don't think that's the telecommunications network and systems that we need. When we look at what has happened with consolidation in the US and the Sprint T-Mobile merger, I think it's another good example of what we can expect here. We saw jobs lost, we saw prices go up, and we did not see any of the promises kept. And I think it's a consistent theme that we see throughout these mergers is that there's a lot of talk to justify it at the time, but at the end of the day, it's about money.
Well, and I think too. I mean, they would disagree. They were suggesting that the prices are not the highest. You know, they're in the middle of the pack. But I'll leave that for another discussion. Again, to open media, you know, what lessons do you think Canadians can learn from the acquisition of the Manitoba telecommunications service by Bell back in 2017? In that case, of course, there was divestiture of things like store locations and that discounted spectrum. But you noted at the time that it's going to erode competition in telecommunications, and ultimately led to the increase in price of services. What tangible results have we seen from that acquisition, and what's been the overall impact on price and service availability?
I mean, we even saw at the time the Competition Bureau itself said that this deal was going to have a negative impact, but still permitted the deal to go through. And I think that to some of the questions you were discussing with your previous panel around, you know, what amendments can be made to the deal to try and make it palatable, I think that Bell MTS is a really good example of how that doesn't work. It's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, trying to figure out how you can tinker with the margins enough to feel better about the decision, but knowing that ultimately it's going down. And I think that when we see what happened with Bell MTS, we saw the jobs lost. We saw they promised prices wouldn't go up, but they did. All of the things that were promised were to get the deal to go through. And the small amendments that were made to try and build out ExploreNet as a competitor didn't pay off because you're spinning out even smaller providers to try and compete where the regional provider couldn't keep up. And I think trying to continue to carve things out smaller and smaller to justify the consolidation to the maximum legal limit is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do, which is figure out what is the end result we actually want, and that's a healthy market.
Well, and I think when you discuss the regional providers and including Shaw, they've benefited from being able to acquire spectrum at lower costs throughout the set-asides. But unfortunately, these providers sometimes have a poor track record when it comes to investing and deploying that spectrum in rural communities. And in fact, you know, we understand that Shaw has so far deployed only about 8% of its holdings, despite acquiring more than 1.7 billion in heavily discounted spectrum, on the assumption that it's going to be competing with the big three on price. I'm curious what your position is and whether or not there needs to be a use it or lose it deployment condition attached to the license to ensure that providers who do buy spectrum are actually putting it to use for all Canadians, including those that live in rural areas, and what you would see that use it or lose it concept actually being.
I think that provision is really important, but doesn't just apply to set aside providers. I think that should apply to all providers. If we are making sure that spectrum is available, it is with the assumption that those communities are going to be served. And whether that's 4G or 5G service, we're seeing people really keen to buy that spectrum, and yet we're not necessarily seeing the results in all of those communities across the board. So I think that that's something that we would really need to give a closer look at as we move forward.
Thank you. Now, to Mr. Kaplan, the tech savvy, you said competition by design. I'm wondering if you could give us just a few examples of what you think that would look like.
Yeah, thank you. So too often, I think policy is developed with the big incumbents in mind and sort of the system that we have in mind, and then how we can use that, how competition can be encouraged is sort of almost an afterthought in a lot of cases. And really the model that we have right now, it's hard to, you know, and individual examples are out there, but this applies to the entire model. We sort of talk on the large scales about encouraging network builds, but really what people are talking about is the big incumbents, instead of designing a system that encourages competition by design so that small providers can also build networks. And we
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Johari. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank to all the witnesses. It was quite informative um, intervention that you made. Let me start with Mr. Kaplan and TechSavvy and continue on the competition. As you heard, or as I'm sure you reviewed the previous committee um, uh, intervention by Rogers as well as Shaw, they talked about the fact that this merger not only increases the competition, but it also allows them to be able to expand in the make investment in the rural and remote indigenous area. Now, question to you: you talked about investment versus competition. What do you think Rogers means when they say the competition is increasing, and what does your point of view is regarding the competition?
Yeah, so this is why I was emphasizing this difference between two different businesses that are really operating in parallel, building networks on the one hand and competition for services on the other hand. So I think when most of us talk about encouraging competition, we're talking about an end user's experience. Do consumers have choice? Are prices affordable? Do competitors compete for prices and actually affect each other's prices in the market? When Rogers was talking about, or Rogers or Shaw was talking about network builds and the efficiencies of network building encouraging competition, they see a different kind of competition. They see other providers stepping in and maybe accelerating network build plans so that their speeds will keep up over time. These are definitely important issues of competition, but they're different. And as we develop, as you develop policies and you think about what safeguards need to be put in place to protect competition, it's important to distinguish what kind of competition we're talking about so that the policies achieve the ends that you're trying to meet. And specifically, I don't think that the kind of competition that Rogers and Shaw see as resulting from this kind of a merger, I don't see that kind of competition resulting in, better services for Canadians, more affordable prices, competition for services. It's a different element.
Thank you. Much's been back to you again, Mr. Kaplan. Much's been made of the upcoming CRTC MVNO decision. Your company has been very vocal on this issue. Theoretically speaking, if Rogers was willing to waive its opposition to the mandated access, would you support would your organization support that merger?
Sorry, the scenario here is that as a sort of as a condition for the merger to go ahead, Rogers would agree to mandated MVNO.
Yeah.
Look, I don't think we are primarily opposed to the merger in the first place. We also don't, support it. My concern is more that the fact that a merger like this can happen and eliminate a fourth player and result in, a consolidated another giant telecom with incredible market power. That should remind all of us why wholesale has such an important part in promoting real, service layer competition. And encourage the CRTC to develop policies that really encourage service layer competition. So to me, it's not so much as a condition of this or not, if Rogers were to support MVNO. I mean, I think that would be great, and lots of companies would probably take advantage of that as an opportunity. But more importantly, just the fact that we're all sort of realizing what kind of a precarious situation the telecom competition is in makes me think that really an MVNO solution is the only way to go.
Last question to you, Mr. Kaplan. From investment view that your company makes, when this merger takes happen, if it happens, how would it impact your decision on making investments in various regions in Canada?
So I should be clear that our primary investments in facilities are around our headquarters in Chatham, Kent, in southwestern Ontario. So, this merger would not directly affect our investment plans where we're building fiber and fixed wireless. But there is an aspect where Shaw and Rogers do compete with each other on wireline for competitors' attention and competitors' energy. So, and not just Shaw and Rogers, but all underlying carriers, incumbent carriers, to the extent that some carriers offer us better services or give us better rates, that may attract our attention there, and we may put more energy into growing in that part of the country or on their network. And that is certainly that does drive some of the dynamic of competition in Canada. And there's a risk, a very real risk, that this flattens some of that. There would not be that competition between regions or between Rogers and Shaw.
Thank you, Amada.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Our next turn is for Mr. Lemire. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll begin with Ms. Tribe from Open Media. First, what's your take on the 5G solution? Does it lead to innovation for Indigenous, remote, and rural regions?
Thank you. I think there is a world where 5G can lead to a lot of innovation for Indigenous, remote, rural communities. There's a lot of talk of what it can do for farming communities, for example, and how it can actually help with our agricultural industries. I think the concern that I have and that a number of people have with 5G is that the promises of what it can do for rural Canada are very far from where we are in actually implementing it in rural Canada. The same way that we have seen all other internet technologies started in the most densely populated areas and work their way out, 5G will follow the same footprint and it will follow the same path. And we've heard from the companies themselves that they're looking to deploy their 5G technologies starting in cities like Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, rolling outwards from there. And so a lot of the talk about what it can do is dependent on not just it first being served to those who already have the best internet access, but it is reliant on things like fiber as a backbone to actually get there, which, as we know through previous conversations around internet infrastructure, is far from reality in a number of those areas. So we're a long ways away from there.
And consequently, your priority regarding Shaw-Rogers merger, you think this will have major negative impacts on prices. Could you give us numbers for those prices? How it will impact Canadians?
It's hard to predict specific prices, although I know everyone wants to be able to do that. But I think even just hearing what Rogers promised is that freedom prices for cell phones, as an example, and this is not just about cell phones, this will impact home internet as well. But when you look at what they have promised is that for the next 3 years, cell phone prices will stay the exact same. But when you actually look at what's been happening in the cell phone market overall, prices have actually been coming down slowly, slower than they have around the world, but they have been coming down. So even just staying where we are is falling further and further behind. And Freedom itself has been the one that has been helping push Bell, TELUS, and Rogers to lower their prices. And so if you have them locked in and no pressure for the other companies to lower their prices, immediately I think you're going to see the effects of that.
Another question for you. What are your expectations regarding the CRTC and the Competition Bureau in this merger?
I hope they look at this really closely, and I hope they understand just how big of a decision this is and what an impact it will have. I think looking back at how the Bell MTS deal was handled, it's not encouraging because even though all of the flags were raised about what damage it would do, it was allowed to proceed anyways. But I really hope that both the CRTC and the Competition Bureau and the Minister and Cabinet learn from previous decisions and previous mistakes.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Lawford from the Public Interest Advocacy Center. First, I'd like to ask you the same question. What are your expectations for the CRTC and the Competition Bureau? Well, I expect for the Bureau to carry out a very in-depth investigation. We are here for consumers, and as I said in my remarks, they carried out quite a strict test which proved that this big deal will have an adverse effect on consumers, and that outweighs the efficiencies for both of these companies. So that's a very difficult test to carry out. But as for the CRTC, it doesn't have, or rather, it's only if the two are able to exchange their wireline services. That doesn't change much. There should be a review. It's just a review of cable services and cable distribution and broadcasting distribution. So I am concerned that CRTC will give us their I would like to hear their decision earlier. Thank you. I have another question for you. But nothing shows that Shaw is in financial difficulty. We don't understand why Shaw is selling. Can you comment on that, please?
The Shaw family, of course, is at that stage where they may want to cash out, and they're going to have a seat on the board. It's also, unfortunately, showing the difficulty of mounting a full attack and being a fourth player in Canada. I think it's tiring and takes a lot of capital. And even with all the advantages they have of being a big, strong cable, they're feeling the heat. But at the end of the day, it's about money, and it's a big deal, and they're probably just cashing out.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And my first question will be for Mr. Lawford and Ms. Tribe. So I've seen this scenario before, starting with Minister Rock, Robillard, Emerson, Bernier, Prentice, Clement, Paradis, Moore, Baines, and now Minister Champagne have to wrestle with this since I've been here. But in the 1990s, Canada used to have a regulatory process, and wouldn't it make some sense right now for us to get things in check and get things in order right now to bring in similar like water and other types of utilities that we have, since this is a public asset, some type of a regulatory approach for some base services to settle things down and to ensure, especially during a time where this is an essential service. Obviously, it's become so clear with COVID-19 for school, education, social inclusion, and so forth. And as Ms. Tribe noted, is that we have quite a discrepancy amongst our Aboriginal and communities as well too. Doesn't it make some type of degree of sense to perhaps at least take a pause here and make sure that some basic prices are instilled under regulatory processes? Mr. Lawford first, and then Ms. Tribe.
Well, raising the issue of whether to have either price regulation, which is what I think you're saying, or at least an affordable package for lower income Canadians is something that hasn't been favored by the CRTC since the new act came in 1993, and there have been many proceedings since saying they're getting out of the business of price setting. I think it would be a shock that would require the government to indicate to the CRTC that policy had to be re-pursued. So to the extent that you can do that in Parliament, I would highly encourage that policy statement from the government, whoever forms it. And then in terms of an affordability package, we've been pushing one for years because it's out of the reach, cellular service in particular, out of reach of many Canadians, and we need a subsidy for those folks.
Ms. Tribe?
I think there are two important issues in what you raised. One is price and one is service. And I think when you look at remote and Indigenous communities, they often go hand in hand, but very often it's so expensive because they are so underserved. The actual service is not available itself. And I think that's where we look at the need to actually have the government support building the infrastructure. I think in this deal, there's a lot of talk about that and promises, but there's absolutely no accountability. There's no transparency into what is currently planned or what would be any different should this deal go through, other than it sounds nice and it's something we need desperately. So I think that actually one of the biggest things we could do for prices for those underserved communities is make sure they have access, because once you do that and you look at the number of providers over the wholesale regime that are now available, the types of different choice that people have, it's very different from being stuck with a dial-up connection or a single satellite provider. And I think that will go a long way, in addition to making sure there are affordability mechanisms in urban areas as well.
I think what's often lost in this conversation is the use of public right of way, be it on the ground or in the air, is a privilege, not a right. And that it is owned by the Canadian public, and we have complete control at the end of the day on how we want to exercise that in our society and our communities. If I could, to Mr. Lawford, you raised specifically the efficiencies defense. I'm not sure everybody's aware of that, but this is archaic. And if I'm not correct, I think we're one of the last countries to even have this relic, because it really is an excuse. And we've seen that through, I think, a propane case, an example, where consumers really got the bum's rush at the end of the day. And competition was shut it down because of this, basically a cleanup that's necessary in legislation.
The efficiencies defense is something that the Business Council of Canada urged to be put into the Competition Act when it was reviewed in the 90s, and it's an unfortunate appendix that we should really cut out, because we are alone in OECD countries pretty much with that kind of defense. What it does is, even if we go in and we prove that a 4-3 merger is bad, even if we go in and we say the wireline control is going to be in the hands of Bell, TELUS, and Rogers now nationwide, and that's not good for competition. If Rogers shows that they're going to, in effect, save money by combining the two with their capital expenditures and so on, they win. It's like putting your hand on the scale. It's impossible for us to counter that unless we do quite a difficult proving exercise after the Supreme Court made it even harder recently in a case called Tervita. So we'll try, but it's something that Parliament should re-engage with.
And to Ms. Tribe, the Competition Bureau, I have a lot of faith in their capabilities. They've got some excellent women and men working down there that have done some tremendous work. They have, though, been on the record coming at different times, as I don't need to read through all those ministers I've been here through, asking for more resources or being enhanced. I'm worried about them not having the tools necessary to delve in and also to be respected. Do you have any concerns about that, or am I just basically on the wrong side on that particular point?
No, I would agree with you. I think that it is far past time to look at the Competition Act, the powers of the Competition Commissioner, and what the Bureau is able to do, to look at what competition actually means in this country. I think when you look at a number of industries, but telecom being an excellent example, there is a long history of oligopolies or government sanctioned monopolies that do not provide the competition that I think we would like to believe the Bureau is there to support.
And real quickly, I know that I'm running out of time. Mr. Andy Kaplan, Mirth, sorry, real quickly. Tech Savvies, are you going to be part of the spectrum auction with the coming up, and any thoughts as to whether it should be delayed?
I think that I am about out of time, and I'm not sure that I can actually speak to it. Well, maybe I'll leave that there. Maybe we can.
I'll try to
get
back to you next time. Thanks, Madam Chair. I appreciate it.
I think that was like a saved by the card. I think that he was playing that one.
I felt that way.
So our next round of questions will start with MP Kelly. Welcome to INDU. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here today. And I'm a Calgary MP, and I have received dozens of individual emails from constituents raising concerns about this transaction. Some of them are concerned about competition. Some of them are concerned about the impact of this deal on the local economy in Calgary and employment in Calgary. Many people that work for Shaw live in my riding and throughout the city. I would say the majority, though, of the emails are concerned about both. So I'd like to ask any of our panelists today to comment on the public argument made by the proponents for the deal. It has been said and argued that that the balance sheet of the merged entity will have the strength to make necessary investments to deliver 5G, that employment will be maintained in Calgary, and in fact that there'll be all kinds of new employment opportunities, and that ultimately this deal will, and that consumers will be protected, particularly the basic packages that cannot rise for 3 years, and some would say though that any announcement of a merge transaction generally paints a positive view of it. So I'll ask any of our panelists to comment on the credibility of the claims, and whether a merge of this nature is necessary for this entity to have the balance sheet strength to make necessary investments in 5G.
Yeah, sorry, Laura.
You go first, John.
Okay, if I may, I'll just say that most of the time when companies are merging and they're talking about efficiency gains, that is employment, and so that means hiring people. It may not happen over the next 2-3 years, but that's the amount of time it usually takes to get two organizations to get together. So I don't think you've got employment guaranteed, whatever is said. In terms of some of the savings they might have through hardware and that sort of thing, you're really just replacing one with the other. You also wondered about whether, people who are calling saying they're having trouble with prices, they're worried about prices going up. You have to consider that it's also prices that will go up for TELUS users and Bell users, because when there's only 3 in the market, then there's nothing to tether them down to the lower price that Freedom used to provide. The Freedom people will be frozen at that deal, but you'll never get it anymore. Only people who used to have it. So I think maybe some of your constituents are reacting to that. Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think that we've heard promises, actually new jobs will be created, and I'd be curious if those are permanent full-time jobs that people can bank on as careers, or if they're temporary contract transition jobs that are to transition some of the hardware that they actually have to make their networks compatible. We have a large community in Western Canada at Open Media, and we've had thousands of people write into us very concerned about what this means for jobs, for affordability, and I think it's a pretty universal concern, in particular in Western Canada, knowing that it is very unlikely that companies want to maintain 2 finance departments and duplication of everything. And I think to John's point, that's what mergers mean. They are trying to find efficiencies, and that generally means jobs.
Mr. Kaplan.
Yeah, I guess I wonder how different those comments from constituents would look if we had a robust wholesale-based competition. We had lots of different providers offering services to customers, so they're not just buying their service from Shaw or TELUS and wondering where they're going to be stuck. To be clear, TechSavvy has customers in Calgary and throughout Shaw's footprint as well, and so do other wholesale-based providers. But that whole framework has really been crumbling over the past 5 years, and we've been trying to get the CRTC to shore it up. If we had much stronger competition, lower prices, and lots of realistic alternatives, then I think you probably wouldn't see the same concerns from constituents about the competition side. I don't think that I can comment as much on the job side, which or at least I can't add to what John and Laura already said about that.
All right. Well, thank you. The great answers, and I would say that no merger announcement ever started with great. We have an opportunity to raise our prices and pass on the additional revenue to our shareholders. So this is where I think a lot of these concerns are coming from. I don't know if I've got time for another question, Madam Chair.
Unfortunately, you have 3 seconds.
All right. Okay.
Thank you very much, MP Kelly. Our next round of questions goes to MP Jacek. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for coming in front of our committee yet again. I'm going to pick up a little bit on what Mr. Kaplan-Murth was saying. When we were listening to Rogers and Shaw earlier this week, it was clear that what I had always thought of as competition, and what I think most consumers think of as competition, many players competing for the same pool of customers, was looked on quite differently by both Rogers and Shaw. And in fact, one of the representatives from Rogers used the term dynamic competition. And so perhaps Mr. Lawford, I have tried to look this up and I find it quite confusing. Could you maybe elaborate on this concept of dynamic competition that in fact it sounded like Rogers was using that as their statement that there was increased competition?
Yeah, I think it's a business gobbledygook term. It doesn't actually have any meaning. But what I would say is what I think they're thinking is they will be larger and better capitalized and therefore able to roll out services on the pace they want to, where they want to, when they want to, because there's fewer players and they don't have to turn in and face a fourth competitor in the market and divert resources. So I believe that's what these guys are calling dynamic competition. It's more control over competition.
In other words, fewer players, they can actually potentially access a bigger piece of the pie that's out there in essence. That's the way I kind of ended up interpreting it. Would you say that's kind of how it could end up?
I think you did about as well as anybody could in that with that term.
Thank you. Now, given the fact that the efficiencies defense does still exist in the Competition Act, and given the fact that, again, Rogers is saying that as a larger, better capitalized company, that they are going to be able to invest in 5G and all the commitments that they have made and that are on their website, etc. How is there any way that the Competition Bureau, notwithstanding this efficiencies defense, could in somehow make it a condition that Rogers, in fact, does deploy the 5G commitments that they're making to remote communities, to Indigenous communities? Is that potentially a condition that could be put on an agreement to this acquisition?
Yes, the Competition Bureau, when they have a settlement with a company, merging companies can put in conditions and they can follow up, usually up to 5 years afterwards. So they could dream up any conditions to put on here. But I would just say on the efficiencies defense, the Competition Bureau could win that as well. If prices go up, that's what's called a deadweight loss. So if prices go up in the entire industry, and that goes on the consumer side of the scale for this efficiencies balance. Also, if the shareholders of Rogers get a lot more money, well, who owns shares in Canada? It tends to be the people in the top quintile of income. That's counted as a loss to lower income Canadians, and that goes on the consumer side of the scale too. So the Competition Bureau could conclude the efficiencies are actually on the consumer side and say no to the deal. They did that with Bell MTS, but at the end, they brokered this big leaf deal with putting on ExploreNet, which was a travesty. But they could be taking a hard line. And your committee, if they mention something about the efficiencies defense, could give a little steel in the spine of the Competition Bureau.
Well, that's reassuring to a certain extent because it's hard to see who on earth is in favor of this merger other than the shareholders and the families involved. I mean, and as Ms. Tribe has shown with her petition and so on, and it's clearly, I haven't heard anyone in favor. So it's reassuring that the Competition Bureau can kind of balance those competing interests to a certain extent. I guess, Ms. Tribe, how would you feel if there were conditions such as Mr. Lawford has potentially described? Would you be satisfied in any way?
I would have to get really creative in the amount of conditions that I could possibly put forward to find something that would offset this enough to make it worthwhile. I think we are so far from where we need to be under the current circumstances that trying to take so many creative measures to prevent us going backwards is a bit much. Sorry, we're out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And first-time witnesses are telling me they're out of time. It's refreshing. So our next round of questions goes to Député Lemire. Vous avez 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je vais tenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to be just as rigorous. My question is for Mr. Kaplan-Myth. He's used to come to our committee. In December, I asked him a question. I will ask him again. How will the government can support a fourth player, and I don't mean necessarily the CRTC, but really the government?
Is really the wrong strategy. As long as we have this strategy of nurturing a fourth player to introduce some degree of competition, we're really designing the system to fail. We're going to be one merger away from, complete collapse of competition. A fourth player, may be enough to influence prices to some degree, but it is not robust competition that can survive major deals like this one. This is clearly not going to be the only deal like this on the horizon. So, what can the government do to encourage a fourth player? I mean, I think that I think it's the wrong strategy. It's certainly not what I described as competition by design. And I think rather what the government needs to do is put its energy into encouraging other forms of competition for services, so that this fourth player issue doesn't become, well, it's not really the goal.
So, which role could tech savvy play to make services more affordable? What opportunity do you see in this context?
Right now is considering final rates that are the bulk of what a business like Tech Savvy relies on right now. Those are the regulated wholesale rates for most of these services. So, those have been under appeal for years, and I don't have enough time to go into the details of that. But if the CRTC finalizes its 2019 rates, Tech Savvy and lots of other competitors will use those rates to lower prices, which will have an effect on internet prices across Canada. It will lower prices across the board.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Our next round of questions goes to MP Massey. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. To Mr. Lawford, because you mentioned that the MYNO decision coming from CRTC, and maybe you can highlight that a little bit more, the importance of that, because that was where Rogers, and I don't blame Rogers. I mean, they decided right here, they're just going to buy instead of build. I mean, that's why they went after Cogeco, and this decision has relevance to that. So can maybe you highlight a little bit that, because I don't think it gets enough attention, because that could introduce some competition, but I think it was the real reasons that they made the play on Cogeco is to bring them, into the fold before they actually became a player.
Yes, you're right. The CRTC MVNO decision is going to probably allow mobile virtual network operators, but the details is the devil here, because there's some hints in the hearing that it was only going to be for players that had facilities already, like Cogeco, like Tech Savvy, that own their own stuff, not people who would come in and start a true virtual mobile virtual network, a light MVNO. If that's the case, then I think trying to take out Cogeco would have been smart, because they have facilities, and then you take out Shaw, which also has facilities, and then you pretty much have very small or no MVNOs to compete with. So that may be the strategy.
Yeah, no, and that decision is going to either open up, and I didn't realize that's good intel that you have there. I don't always follow the hearings, and appreciate that. Ms. Tribe, with regards to the previous panel, I mentioned, because we had one of the panelists, Videotron, actually sold part of their spectrum already that they granted the Toronto license they had to Rogers, and also too, with Mobilicity's gone. There's a whole, I mean, we're actually, strewn with castaways the last 10 years of startups and so forth. So you're just, I think that, you're just saying right now, don't even provide some type of, I guess, like I use it as Frankenstein type of approach to try to, bust up the Shaw here in pieces and hope they stick together to other components and create competition. We'll still have less. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. When we look at the ways that companies are you can carve them up and try and shape it into something that is not quite too big by whatever standards, but if they're already too big to start with, and you're still letting them combine their capacity in one way or another, it still leads to a problem. And I think that's why the entire approach, when you talk about Mobilicity, you talk about, Wind, which is now Freedom, which is maybe soon to be Rogers. all of that is based on this approach of facilities-based competition, which is that you have to build it yourself to be able to compete. And I think that's where I understand the Shaw family struggles. It is hard to go up against a company like Bell or TELUS or Rogers, who's had decades of head start, and to have to try and start from scratch. And I think that's where, to the points about wholesale, that's so important.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions will go to MP Kelly. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like the witnesses to comment on the extent to which this deal is either a problem in of itself of two large companies merging that may reduce competition, or rather a symptom of a broader problem that existed before and will exist after. And I refer to the spectrum auction system and other aspects of our telecommunication regulatory framework that have got us to this point. Maybe let all three comment on that if you'd like.
Can I start by saying it's both? It's both. Yes, and both the specific deal is a problem, and it shows the destruction of 15 years of trying to have a fourth wireless player. This is the last chapter, and it will kill the policy if it goes through. The specific deal is bad because going 4 to 3, prices will go up. We had a merger in Austria, for example, 4 to 3, and prices went up 95% for the player that got taken over.
Okay, let each of the other two have a quick word, and then I'll hopefully get another question in.
Maybe I'll just go. I think it's also both, but my main concern about it is the way that the systemic problems, to the extent, or systemic issues, I guess. To the extent that on the network side of the business, they can enjoy efficiencies because it's better for one company to be building one network than overbuilding or two companies in different regions. That's clearly going to continue to happen. Those realities of business might just be the case, and it seems like this industry tends toward monopolies and duopolies. So I think that will continue to happen. On the service side, the reason this is a problem is because we haven't really supported wholesale-based competition for a long time in this country.
Let's try.
I'm not sure how much time we have, but I would agree it's both. I think that the deal itself is a problem, and I think the outcomes of the deal themselves are a problem. And the fact that this deal is even being proposed goes to show just how big our companies are and how much bigger they think they need to get in order to be able to keep growing. And that's what the goal of these companies is. It's growth and it's continued profit. And this is the way they think they need to do that next based on the way the current system is set up. And they also think it's okay. They think it's reasonable and they think they can get away with it, which is why they're going for it in the first place and talk about it with such certainty, which I think is another thing that raises concerns around our Competition Act and the Competition Bureau, the fact that they don't even think there are questions when they put this forward for something this scale.
Okay. Well, I'm doing my best to try to be open-minded enough to hear all the arguments for and against this transaction, and I certainly share the concerns that I get in these emails about both competition and about the impact on my local economy. And the promise had been I think of 500 new research jobs to go into the Shaw Center, but at the same time, I'm really struck by the absence of being able to hold an entity to any of the comments made at the beginning of a merge. So I guess a last word on the difficulty of the tremendous investment that's required to get us into a 5G system across Canada that gets into the communities that are so terribly underserved and provide competition everywhere so that we can get better rates. How will a larger entity that will compete with the other remaining entities, should there be an expectation that this large new entity could actually provide competition to the other two?
I'll jump in real quick and then I'll try and leave space for you, John. When you look at the underserved areas that we have now in rural, remote, and Indigenous Canada, it is because explicitly the companies have said that they do not find those areas profitable. There is nothing about this deal that suddenly makes those areas profitable to serve, which is why we have the Universal Broadband Fund. It's why we need subsidies and support to guarantee that those areas get connectivity. And at the end of the day, there are still areas those companies are not going to want to serve. And so I think the size of this company and some sort of mega merger does absolutely nothing to change the financial incentive to build it to those areas. And that's why we need additional programs for that.
Just briefly, I would add that we don't know if these two merge how much Shaw itself and Rogers would have spent collectively. And it's not clear from what they've said. They've just said they're going to spend $2.5 billion on 5G. But how much would Shaw have spent plus Rogers spent? In the absence of this deal, it may be the same number.
Thank you very much. And our last round of questions goes to MP Lambropoulos. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I likely won't be using my full 5 minutes, but I'd like to ask Ms. Tribe a question. Open Media has commented in the past about the Bell MTS transaction, and I was wondering if you can tell us about what happened since then to competition in Canada, and if we've seen a difference, a noticeable difference. And yeah, so we'll start with that question.
I think the clearest case to be seen is where you look at cell phone services and wireless services in Canada. And when you used to look at the provincial prices and you look across, you immediately see there is something that stands out in certain provinces, and it's where there is a regional carrier or a fourth provider, those prices are lower. So that would include Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Quebec. And then you would see it in some pockets where Wind, or then Freedom, was kind of evolving at the time in urban areas in Ontario and BC in particular. With MTS being sold to Bell, Manitoba no longer fits into that category anymore. They look the same as every other province across the country who has Bell, TELUS, and Rogers and all of their flanker brands and nothing else. And so when you see, even where in urban centers, Freedom has that footprint. If you look in Vancouver, if you look in Toronto, you can get different deals based on what area of the country you live in. Same thing extends to Manitoba, but as soon as MTS was no longer that fourth option, we saw prices go up really quickly.
And can you talk about the barriers that currently exist for new competitors? Why is it so difficult for them to pierce into the market?
It depends on the type of new competitor, but when you look at cell phone services in particular, it's the fourth carrier strategy is really based on that idea of facilities-based competition. If you want to be a competitor on cell phone networks in Canada right now, until the CRTC rules otherwise in the MVNO decision, you need to come into the country with billions of dollars. You need to find a way to bid on spectrum to be able to purchase the airwaves themselves to be able to build a network, and then you need to start building across the country cell phone towers from one end to the other so that you then have a service to sell to customers. And you can't make any money until you've built that network. And I think that's why we've seen so many companies go the way that Wind did in being sold to Shaw, is that it's so hard to get off the ground when it's so long between starting and actually having your very first customer.
Okay, thank you. I know Mr. Kaplan-Meier, you may have comments on that one as well. If you'd like to chime in, you can. If not, that's it for me.
Yeah, I guess on the mobile side, in a way, because of the strategy of encouraging a fourth player, we sort of have this overbuilding, this inefficient overbuilding in a way that we don't have on the wireline side, right? On wireline, to overbuild, you would need to have more wires coming into your home. Right now, you have a phone company and a cable company, but if Rogers just rolled out a network in Calgary and overbuild, they would be doing, they would run new wires to people's homes in Calgary. That would clearly be inefficient. In a way, what we've done on mobile is sort of encourage this very inefficient fourth player overbuilding model, as though that was going to introduce enough competition. And, as Laura Tribe just said, it does lower prices in some markets where a fourth player becomes powerful enough to influence prices. But clearly, because of the situation that we're looking at with Freedom right now, it doesn't create a long-lasting, robust model of competition that can survive, a simple merger of two companies. We're always going to be one business deal away from the end of competition if that's our only strategy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that is our time for today. I'd like to thank
Madame
the
la Présidente,
witnesses.
si vous me permettez.
Oui, Monsieur Lemire,
Oui,
avez-vous un
j'aimerais
point
juste
de
faire une
l'ordre?
intervention. Je sais que
Sorry, I know it's a break week, but I've noticed that half of the members had their cameras off. I would like more rigor. There's a conservative MP, not even a member of the committee, and he was the only one with his camera on. Out of respect for the witnesses, I'm not making a complaint, but we should be present for our witnesses. I think it's important.
So with that, I will thank the witnesses for being with us again today. Always a pleasure to have you here. You're almost honorary members at this point of INDU. So thank you again for your time. Greatly appreciated. And I'd like to a special shout out to all the folks that are helping us have these meetings in constituency weeks, and to the MPs that, as you said, I know how hard it is to try to juggle constituency time as well as committee time and so on. So thank you very much for your rigor and for being with us today. And with that, I just a gentle reminder, if you haven't got your witnesses into the clerk with respect to the next study, please make sure you do so, or else we'll be having shorter meetings. So with that, I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.